Greetings. Greetings to the gods. Welcome back to this channel. So we're continuing America's and Trinidad's Hope. By Thomas Schaff. Chapter 9. Bank Auditor from Texas. True story. A radio station in Texas invited me to speak about bank loans. After I spoke, a man called, identifying himself as a former CPA bank auditor. He told me he always knew that something was wrong, but could never quite put his finger on it. In a matter of minutes, I explained how I felt. The bank auditor was concerned that he could go to jail. I suggested we do some role playing, as if we were in court. I told him to pretend he was on the witness stand. I said, "Do you have the competence to conduct the bank audit?" He said yes. He admitted that under CPA ethics, he had no choice but to say yes. I asked, "Did you determine if the bank legally owned the promissory note?" He said yes, that this is part of the audit requirement. I asked him, on a 100,000 bank loan, how much legal tender must the bank loan in order for the bank to legally own the 100,000 promissory note? He responded that it would have to loan 100,000. I knew he had just made a fatal mistake. I asked, "What does the 100,000 bank liability mean?" He said, "It means the bank owes 100,000 of legal tender." I asked him, if a check is money or merely an order to pay money. He gave the standard reply, stating a check is the same as money because you can redeem it in cash. I asked him if, according to the Uniform Commercial Code, it is money or merely an order to pay money. He said, "Don't worry about it." I said, "Do you have the competence to answer the question?" I knew he could not say no if he took a CPA bank audit assignment. He finally confessed that it is not money. It is merely an order to pay money. I asked, according to the standard bank bookkeeping entries and according to the Federal Reserve Bank policy and procedures, who provided the original capital to fund the bank loan check? Was it the bank or the borrower? He said, if I answered that question, I might go to jail. He admitted the check and liability is not money. He admitted the bank must loan 100,000 of legal tender to the borrower in order for the bank to legally own the promissory note. That means the promissory note cannot fund the bank loan check. He became very upset and concerned. He explained that if the bank does not legally own the promissory note, then the audit was incorrect and must be changed. If this were done, it would open the door for a lawsuit. He very well might go to jail. The next day he called me, claiming he'd found a weakness in my argument and charging that the banking procedure was not check-knitted. I asked him if the word loan meant money advanced to a borrower to be repaid at a later date, usually with interest. He said yes. He had no choice. He had to say yes. This definition comes from the dictionary. I asked him if the bank records legal tender as a bank asset. He said yes. This refuted his claim that the local banks have a license to create the opposite of legal tender, bank liability called checkbook money owing legal tender, and loan, the opposite of legal tender, to the borrower. I asked him if it is standard policy for the banks to record promissory notes as a loan from the borrower to the bank. Obviously, the answer is yes. He knew I had the Federal Reserve Bank publication showing the standard bank bookkeeping entries, which recorded the promissory note as a bank asset offset by a new bank liability. This is economically the same as loaning the promissory note to the bank and the bank loaning the value back to you. He knew that if it is material to disclose a loan from the bank to you, it is equally material to disclose a loan from you to the bank. If it was not a loan, it had to be a theft. He could not answer the question. I asked him, according to your understanding, is the promissory note money or not? He told me he could not answer this question in court without going to jail. Later in the book, I will explain why he gave this response. Chapter 10. More and more professionals joining to save America. A true story. Jeff, a California CPA, asked me to train him as an expert witness. I had him listen to my 15 hours of cassette tapes and read my manual. I then flew to Los Angeles and met him at a friend's house. I spent hours writing on the chalkboard explaining the bank loan agreement. The best way to teach him the concept was to hold a mock trial. I asked Jeff to pretend he was the bank president or CPA expert witness on the witness stand. As an expert witness, you must know everything about banking. You cannot claim you do not know an answer to a question in the area you are testifying in. I asked Jeff, do you know the Federal Reserve Bank policies and procedures regarding loans, deposits, and bookkeeping entries? He said he did. Is a bank liability a banker's debt? I asked. He said yes. Do banks charge interest for the use of borrowed money? Yes, they do, he said. Is this a 100,000 promissory note? I said hypothetically, holding up a piece of paper. He said yes. If the bank refused to loan the borrower a 100,000 check as consideration for the promissory note, do you believe the bank would legally own the promissory note? He said if the bank refused to loan the money, the bank does not legally own the promissory note. Does a bank liability mean the bank owes legal tender? He responded yes. Is the check money or merely an order to pay money? He responded, it is not money. The Uniform Commercial Code says it is not money. It acts like money with the assumption that there is legal tender deposited to make the check valid. Is it your assumption that the bank followed the Federal Reserve Bank policies and procedures? He said if they didn't, they would go to jail. Is it your opinion that the bank legally owns the promissory note? He said yes. I said, Jeff, if this were a real court case, I think you would be headed to jail. At the very least, you would have lost the case. He asked me what the problem was. I explained that the check could never be the consideration loaned for the promissory note. If the check was the consideration loaned, then there was no cash or asset behind the check, making the check illegal. The Fed publications state that the bank never loans other depositors money or legal tender as consideration for the promissory note. According to the Fed publications, the promissory note is used as the value to fund the check. If the promissory note funded the check, then the check would never be the consideration loan because the bank owned the promissory note without loaning 1 cent of legal tender. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? The question is, did the bank steal the promissory note or record it as a loan from the borrower to fund the check? Did they then lie and claim the check was the consideration loaned to obtain the promissory note? Key lesson. Most non-bankers believe the bank bookkeeping entries were the opposite of what the agreement actually was. There is no agreement without mutual understanding. Did the agreement imply a loan of the bank's money to the borrower or a loan of the borrower's money to the borrower? The banker does not want to answer which came first, the chicken or the egg. Jeff asked me, what if the bank sold the promissory note? Was the promissory note stolen? Look up the words receipt of stolen goods and property, and I think you will agree that the one who bought the promissory note understood the bank policy, standard bookkeeping entries, and agreement. They had knowledge and intent. Buying a car you know was stolen makes you guilty. As judge and jury, you must decide if the acquisition of the promissory note is receipt of stolen goods or property. Stealing is defined as obtaining another's property through a trick, a dishonest act without authorization or permission given, larceny, embezzlement, false pretense, and other wrongful acquisitions. Larceny is defined as obtaining property by unauthorized means through fraud, false representation, intentional perversion of the truth, deception with intent, or perceived plan to convert or steal. Preconceived plan to convert or steal. Larceny by fraud or deception is defined as obtaining property by deception, using or creating a false impression and or reinforcing a false impression, or preventing one from obtaining the correct information that may alter the transaction. The deceiver fails to correct the misleading information which he previously created. Example, the bank claimed there was a loan when there was only an exchange of equal value, and then they charged you as if they loaned you their money. The deception changed the cost and the risk of the transaction. Through this trick, the banks could obtain nearly all the property in the nation for free. Judges and attorneys have routinely refused evidence into court. Larceny by fraud, extortion, and concealment are committed when a court prevents one from bringing evidence into court for one's defense. The lawyer reinforces a false statement claiming there was a loan, concealing that the bank took actual cash value from us, returned it back to us, and claimed it was a loan from the bank and not a return of the unauthorized loan from us to the bank. Please look up the words conspiracy and white collar crime as well. The bank told you that you received a check you can cash for legal tender, and that the check was the loan allowing you to buy the house or car. All one has to do is follow the money entries to see that this is not the case. Chapter 11. How does society value money? Money is only worth the products it can buy. Money is valued by the labor required to obtain it. Your employer gives you a paycheck because you sold your labor to him in exchange for money. Before money existed, people bartered their time for other people's time. Joe agreed to work 5 hours to fix Randy's wagon, and in exchange, Randy agrees to work 5 hours to fix Joe's plumbing. Money merely made it easier to barter one's labor. It is the medium of exchange for other people's labor. Money can be valued in time, and banks charge interest for the time money is borrowed. When you buy food, you barter the farmer's labor. A gold coin has value in itself. You could melt the coin down and people will still trade their labor for the melted gold. If everyone counterfeited money and stopped working, people would have houses full of cash and no food, water, electricity, or gas to fill their cars. Bankers know labor is more valuable than counterfeit money. Labor produces wealth. A counterfeiter receives your labor for free and devalues the money and savings by the inflation caused by creating the counterfeit money. If your neighbor loaned you 10,000, he worked 1,000 hours to earn the money. You will work 1,000 hours to repay the loan plus interest. Money was the barter mechanism to exchange labor for labor, value for value. No one stole anything from anyone. If banks loaned other depositors money, you would receive a loan of their labor to be repaid with your labor. No one stole or counterfeited. No one received another person's labor for free. But the bank never loaned you value for value. They did not loan you 1,000 hours of labor to be repaid by 1,000 hours of your labor plus interest. The bank received 1,000 future hours of your labor for free, and this labor gave value to the new money that the bank created and claimed it loaned to you. Your labor funded the bank loan check. The bank received your labor for free when you paid the principal and interest. Then often the bank forecloses and receives the property for free. The borrower is constantly giving the bank his labor without receiving any of the bank's labor or other depositors' labor in return. The banks claim Congress gave them the right to create money and receive Americans' labor for free. A thief and counterfeiter can receive your labor for free too, unless they are caught and go to prison. If you are constantly stolen from or forced to give your labor to another for free, you will be poor, in debt, and bankrupt, while the one receiving your property for free gets rich without working. The cost of bank created money is the cost of having today's value of your future payroll check stolen and used to create new counterfeit money value that is loaned back to you at interest. It is not only the cost of stealing and giving you back a debt in place of the property, future payroll check stolen, it is also the cost of inflation and devaluation of currency created by counterfeit money. The cost of Lincoln's money eliminates the cost of stealing and paying new interest on new debt. Lincoln needed $449,338,902 in taxes, borrowed funds, and newly printed greenbacks to finance the war. The bankers wanted Lincoln to print the money and give the cash to them for free, or to have them create the money and loan the cash back to Lincoln at 24% to 36% interest. That would cost the taxpayer $449,338,902 plus $168,762,000 in interest every year. The great-great-grandchildren of the taxpayers would be paying the great-grandchildren of the bankers this interest today if Lincoln did not refuse to give the cash to the bankers for free and return it as a loan to the government. Lincoln printed 100 for less than 1 cent, making a profit of 99.99 for each 100 printed. The new money was used to pay the soldiers and bought the guns, saving taxpayers the money. Lincoln's solution saved the taxpayer $449,338,902 plus interest. The controversy is over who receives the $449,338,902 for free: the taxpayers, government, or the bankers. The government is supposed to belong to the voters. It was never intended to be taken from the voters and given to the bankers. The cost and value of money is much more than labor, interest, and debt. It has to do with who controls the government. The value or cost of money determines if you are an economic slave or free, as our founding fathers intended. Do the citizens own the country and government, or do the banks? If you are forced to give your labor away for free, over time you will be broke and will lose your country. United States notes are the banker's nightmare and the citizen's salvation. Real Americans who love our government and Constitution and know we fought the Revolutionary War to stop banks from creating money and only allow the government that privilege will conclude that President Abraham Lincoln was right and that United States notes have the greatest value to society. Chapter 12. What is money in America? Most people know that gold and silver is lawful money in the United States, according to our founding fathers and the U.S. Constitution. One cannot lawfully redefine money without an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. I can argue that Federal Reserve notes are not legal nor lawful using the law and court cases. I would have to write another book to present the evidence. However, for the purposes of teaching you the real bank loan agreement, we will call Federal Reserve notes legal tender. It would take too long to explain how Congress passed bills taking away gold and silver and substituting them with Federal Reserve notes. It suffices to say that they did it. Instead of the government creating the money, the banks created it. How did the banks create money? The Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond publication, Your Money, says, quote, Federal Reserve banks pay 2.5 cents for each note produced by the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, end quote, page 12. The bank buys 100 of cash for 2.5 cents, making a profit of 99.975. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago publication, Two Faces of Debt, says, quote, Federal Reserve notes are liabilities, end quote, page 4. A liability is a bank debt or an IOU. Rockefeller got the money for free or for the cost of printing the money. This is how Rockefeller got so rich. He was a smart man. The bank his family owns creates money. No wealth is produced. It is simply shifted out of your pocket and put into the bank's pocket. The bank gives back some of it to get the Congress, judges, and sheriffs elected, ensuring more laws are passed and enforced in favor of the banks. Greed and the love of money run this country. According to court cases years ago, judges would have ruled that Federal Reserve notes are not lawful money. What did the bank do? They simply redefined the word money and made the definition mean the opposite of what lawful money used to be. Gold and silver are assets and could never be liabilities. Years ago, you could exchange a Federal Reserve note for gold or silver, but not today. Today, if you ask the bank to give you real money for a 10 Federal Reserve note, they give you back 10 1 Federal Reserve notes. A Federal Reserve note is the opposite of gold or silver asset. The paper money is a bank liability for the real money. It is a bank IOU. For every dollar the banks print, the non-bankers are forced into $1 more of debt, owing the banks more money and interest. It is like the banks printing money, and for every dollar they print, they buy something while having you repay the bank principal and interest on the money they created. The banks cannot lose. The Federal Reserve Bank publications simply redefined money to mean the opposite of what the traditional meaning was. A simple illustration. Years ago, cash was scarce, so people used horses like currency. They bartered. The bank had a better idea. Instead of using a horse as currency, the people gave the bank a 500 horse, and the bank created 500 tokens worth $1 each. The bank received the horse for free by creating 500 new tokens and giving you the new tokens. People used the tokens as money instead of using horses like money. Tokens are really banknotes owing cash. Tokens became checkbook money. Checkbook money stopped people from stealing cash. For safety reasons and out of convenience, people used checkbook money for large transactions and cash for small purchases. The bank simply expanded its operations by exchanging newly created tokens for matching amounts of promissory notes that can be sold for cash. Casinos force you to use cash or tokens, liabilities, as money, and the banks force you to use cash or checkbook money, liability, as currency, thereby forcing their private monopoly money upon the citizens. The people did not see the bank in secret. When the bank created new tokens and exchanged the tokens for horses, the bank ended up owning all the horses for free. It was so profitable that the bank expanded their operation, exchanging nearly anything of value for newly created tokens. Soon the bank owned nearly everything. They learned that counterfeiting works better than outright stealing. Key lesson: an asset. Farms, ranches, cattle, gunpowder, houses, cars, cash, promissory notes, liens on houses, gold, silver, diamonds, or anything else of value can be bartered and traded just like money. A bank token by itself has no value. The proof is that no one will accept a check, liability, or token that cannot be cashed. The bank must receive an asset from us for free that has equal value to cash and can be quickly sold for cash to match the newly created bank token's liabilities, so that people will accept the token as money. The banking monopoly forces the token as a medium of exchange by only accepting cash and tokens to be deposited. Unless one deposits promissory notes and the currency created by the deposit is returned to the depositor as a loan. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago publication Modern Money Mechanics, page 2, uses the logic that if people use tokens in place of cash, then only cash and tokens need be considered money. The Federal Reserve Bank is wrong, and here is the proof. Cash is an asset. Tokens are bank liabilities representing the value of the matching asset earlier deposited, creating the token checkbook money. The token is the substitute for the earlier deposited asset. The asset gives the token value. So the correct conclusion is that only assets are money and liabilities represent a substitute of the asset earlier deposited. The bankers have a secret. If you deposit cash, asset, the cash becomes the bank's property and they owe you back an equal amount of cash or checks. If you deposit a promissory note, asset, it becomes the banker's property just like depositing cash. The banks know you cannot create new deposits, liabilities, tokens, IOUs, checkbook money without first depositing or loaning the bank an asset, cash, check, promissory notes to create the bank liability, checkbook money. This bank liability becomes a token or substitute for the real money, which is a bank asset. They deposit your money, promissory note, or asset, and they keep the money, asset. They use your money to create a matching account of private bank money, liability. They then return your deposit back to you as if they loaned you other people's money, hoping you do not find out that they loaned you your own money. The proof is in Modern Money Mechanics, page 2. Just as a token is a casino liability, checkbook money is a bank liability. The publication states, quote, "This is a transaction concept of money," end quote. It then lists demand deposits, bank liability or tokens, and other checkbook deposits, bank liability or tokens, as money. The next page explains that banks learned how they could create money or tokens by exchanging a borrower's promissory notes for newly created banknotes or bank liabilities tokens and loaning the banknotes back to the alleged borrower as money. Quote, "In this way, banks began to create money," end quote. The next paragraph states, quote, "Transaction deposits are the modern counterpart of banknotes," end quote. Remember, a transaction deposit is a checking account balance, bank liability, or token. Then it explains how issuing a banknote is like making a bank bookkeeping entry that creates a deposit, bank liability, or token for a borrower, which can be spent by writing a check. The check merely transfers the funds or tokens from your checking account to another checking account. Both the deposits and banknotes are bank liabilities used as private bank money tokens. The bank liability is spent like money and is used in place of cash. To use private bank money like cash, one first deposits cash asset or a promissory note asset having actual cash value. The asset is exchanged for a token liability or checkbook money liability owing the cash. Every dollar deposited is matched with a new bank liability or token. Now the depositor spends the token like money because the real money was exchanged for a substitute liability token. No one will use the token as money without first depositing an asset so one can cash the check. The token is dependent on cash behind it if it is to be used as money, thus proving the real money is a bank asset cash and not a liability token. Creating new money proves that they did not loan you on other depositors' money. A token is not legal tender because it is owing cash, which is the opposite of cash. Modern money mechanics gives the details explaining that the bank did not loan you other depositors' money. Richmond Federal Reserve Bank publications, Your Money and Our Money, claim that demand deposits, travelers' checks, and interest-bearing accounts are not legal tender, even though they are usually accepted in payment for purchases for goods and services. These publications admit that they loaned you a bank liability called a demand deposit or checkbook balance traded by check. Modern money mechanics explains how the promissory note is exchanged for credits in the borrower's transaction accounts, thereby creating new money. The new money is then given back to the alleged borrower as a bank loan. Your Money and Our Money claim that, quote, the loan in fact becomes new deposit money, end quote. Federal Reserve Bank of New York publication, I Bet You Thought, states, commercial banks create checkbook money whenever they grant a loan, end quote. Then it gives the details on how the bank exchanges a promissory note for a newly created deposit, and the new deposit becomes new money. The publication then explains that checks are not money. They simply transfer bank liabilities tokens from one checking account to another checking account. They are simply order forms to move transaction balances. The banks want tokens as money because the borrower will not know if the tokens loaned came from other depositors, labor, or if the bank exchanged your promissory note for newly created tokens, loaning you your own labor money back to you. If everyone only used cash as money, issued interest-free by the government, the bank could only loan other depositors money. By exchanging the promissory note for tokens, new money is created. The bank received money or actual cash value for free from the alleged borrower and returned an equal amount of actual cash value back to the same borrower as a bank loan. The economic effect of stealing and counterfeiting could be stopped if we all stopped using credit cards and checkbook money. This is why the bankers are pushing for a cashless society where only checkbook money is used, giving the bank absolute control over you. I know of no other business like this. The borrower hands you 100,000. You hand the 100,000 back as a loan. The borrower repays the 100,000 plus interest. We should all become bankers, judges, police, and lawmakers in order to benefit from this system, or hire legal counsel to give us equal protection, or vote out anyone aiding and abetting the bankers. The bankers do not fear you suing them if they, The bankers do not fear you suing them if they can control the judges. They fear an informed populace agreeing that our founding fathers' constitution prohibits such a banking system. We can never vote out the politicians aiding the bankers until we can get enough brochures and cassette tapes copied and distributed and people reading this book. We need informed voters to correct the problem. Whoever owns or controls the media controls the money and the government. Our brochures, tapes, and this book will become our media to expose the ugly truth about our banking problem. Conclusion. Any asset is money. A car, house, cash, promissory note, lien on a car or house, anything that has value that you own and can trade is money. The banks created a monopoly, forcing you to transfer your assets to the bank for free. The bank gives you back an equal amount of private bank tokens representing the value of the asset. The banks then only accept cash or tokens as money, forcing private bank liabilities IOUs tokens to be used as a substitute in place of the real money, that is, car, house, or promissory note. In the process, the bank obtains the nation's assets for free through money creation. Then the bank loans us back the substitute money liability representing the money the bank just took from us. The Constitution our founding fathers gives us equal protection and gold and silver currency and prohibits credit, bank tokens, liabilities, IOUs. The citizens are not forced to transfer their assets to the bank for free to obtain money. One cannot redefine the constitutional definition of money, that is gold and silver coin asset, without an amendment to the Constitution or a constitutional convention. The Constitution demands equal protection, prohibiting two classes of citizens. Our founding fathers' constitutions prohibits those who can legally transfer wealth from your pocket into theirs, use it to create money and loan it back to you. In the future, informed voters will decide if the bankers are right or if our founding fathers were correct. Our job is to tell everyone what the real bank loan agreement is. The bankers know they must conceal the truth. I talked to bankers who redefine words and call checks cash because you can get cash for the check. We know that a check merely transfers money previously deposited. The banks claim that they do not steal nor counterfeit. They refined it and called it good business or monetize it. Monetize means to make into money. They made the asset house promissory note cash into checkbook money tokens by matching the value of the asset with new tokens. The economic effect is similar to stealing and counterfeiting, but monetize sounds legal. Redefining words does not change the economic effect of the transaction. Someone still transferred an asset from one party to another without the authorization of the one who lost the asset. Chapter 13. Is the promissory note money according to the bank? From previous chapters, we learned that the bank has forced us to use bank IOUs tokens as money. I bet you thought teaches us that the bank IOUs, checkbook money, have no value without first depositing cash or promissory notes to create the bank IOUs traded as money. It explains how banks create money, bank IOUs, based on a borrower's promise to repay. The publication then explains how the alleged borrower's promissory note and secured collateral gives the newly created bank IOU value. The banks create money against the value of those IOUs. The IOUs they are referring to are the alleged borrower's promissory notes. It continues to explain how banks are monetizing debt. Monetizing is simply explained as creating a new bank IOU called new money to match a promissory note IOU to repay the loan. The publication then admits, quote, money doesn't have to be issued by the government, end quote. A simple IOU can be used as money. The same publication admits that promissory notes are money by admitting that any item having the following three traits is money. 1. Anything individuals or banks generally accept in exchange for items of value. 2. A standard of measuring value. 3. Purchasing power stored for future spending. When the bank sells, deposits, or exchanges the promissory note, it is proof that the bank used the promissory note as money. It has a standard of measuring value. it has equal value to cash, and purchasing power is stored, it retains its value because the principal and interest are returned or foreclosure results. Apply the bank's definition of money to bank checkbook money, and you have just proved that checkbook money is not money. The bank checkbook money is merely a scorecard of money banks owe depositors. It is a standard of measuring value owed for the assets. Money owed disqualifies checkbook money as a standard of measuring value. The new asset and new liability represent the same funds deposited. A check or checking account balance liability without cash asset behind it has no value. It is an IOU that cannot be paid. The publication admitted that the value of the bank's IOU, checkbook money, token liability came from the borrower's IOU promissory note asset. People do not accept checks that cannot be exchanged for cash, proving the bank's IOU token is not money per the bank's own definition of money. The bank token liability is merely a substitute representing the real money recorded as a bank asset cash. The promissory note asset has equal value of cash, making the promissory note equal to money asset. The banking monopoly uses tokens, IOUs, checkbook money when you repay the alleged loans in an attempt to force the tokens to be used like money, but the value behind it is a bank asset. In court, it is common for the bank to claim that the promissory note is money to the bank, but not money to the alleged borrower. How can it be money and not money at the same time? If they admit it is money to the bank, then the banker must admit that they received money from the alleged borrower to fund the check. If this is the case, where is the money loaned to issue the check? I received a telephone call from someone suing a bank who claimed that there was not a bona fide signature on the promissory note and that the promissory note was a forgery. He demanded that the bank produce the original promissory note so that he could prove it was a forgery. The bank responded by claiming that the promissory note had burned and that they only had a copy of it. The bank knew that on the back of the promissory note was stamped "Pay to the order of," just like a check, and that people trade these notes like money. The bank also stamps the words "without recourse," which completely eliminates the drawer's secondary liability. Does this show you that they know the promissory note is a hot potato? The bank did not want to show that they altered the promissory. The bank did not want to show. The bank did not want to show that they altered the promise to pay money into money itself. Altering a document makes the document a forgery, and then they would have to admit that you gave them money to fund the check. They had to conceal the evidence and claim that the original burned. Chapter 14. Rancher stamp, a true story. Names are changed to protect the identity of those involved. This is a story every American must hear. I met with a Midwest rancher who showed me documentation of how promissory notes, security agreements are used like money to issue bank loan checks. The rancher owned a commercial dry lot feeding facility for cattle. As customers buy, they need financing. The rancher made an agreement with the bank to give each customer a bank loan check without it costing the bank 1 cent to issue. The rancher had the customer sign a promissory note. Unknown to the customer, the rancher stamped the back of the original promissory note, "Pay to the order of Bank Number 1, Colorado, with recourse, Rancher Trust." The copy of the promissory note given back to the customer never showed the stamp altering the note into money. The rancher hands the promissory note to the bank, and the bank stamps the back of the original promissory note, "Pay to the order of Bank Number 1, Colorado, without recourse. This means that the bank receives the value of the promissory note just like a check, which also says pay to the order of. The first stamp, the first stamp marked with recourse made the rancher and customer liable for the note. When the bank stamped the note without recourse, the bank was no longer liable for paying the note, for repaying the note. The bank then used the note money to fund the bank loan check to the customer. Over 1.6 million were created in 10 months. The bank never used 1 cent of their own money to fund the check and received 1.6 million plus interest in return. It was pure profit. The money loaned to the customer came from the same customer because the note was altered and changed. Many ranchers and banks are involved in this practice. Chapter 15. Did the bank deposit the promissory note? Regardless of whether one exchanges the promissory note for credit in a transaction account or for a check or deposits it, all are essentially the same bookkeeping entry. Economically, all three are the same. About 90% of the balances in customers' accounts, such as demand deposit accounts, savings accounts, certificates of deposits, and checking accounts, were created when the bank granted a loan. The Federal Reserve Bank publications and bank balance sheets prove this. The question is, how can one issue a check or create a checking account balance without first depositing the money? The banks may start redefining words as they have in the past, but economically speaking, it is the same thing as depositing the promissory note. If one used cash instead of a promissory note to issue a check or to create credit in a deposit account, it would be called a deposit. So I will claim that the bank deposits the promissory note and returns the proceeds back to the depositor as a loan. Depositing cash is depositing money you earned in the past. Depositing a promissory note is depositing the value of your future earnings and having it returned to you as a loan. The bank is receiving your promissory note and your future payroll checks for free, depositing them and returning them back to you as a loan. This is why the bank does not want to admit that they deposited the promissory note and call it an exchange. A deposit is like loaning the bank the funds. If one deposited cash and the bank returned it back as a loan, it would be a fraudulent conversion. This is why people say it is a felony when the bank does the same thing with the promissory note. As the judge and jury, I ask you to determine whether this is fraudulent or not. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York publication, The Story of Banks, is summarized as follows. By depositing $5,000 into the bank with a 10% reserve requirement, the bank can lend up to $4,500. That's 5,000 times 90%. When the 4,500 is deposited, the bank can loan another 4,050. That's 4,500 times 90%. When the 4,050 is deposited, the bank can loan another 3,645. That's 4,050 times 90%. The bank's assets thereby grow by 12,195. That's 4,500 plus 4,050 plus 3,645. The publication then explains how, through a 5,000 deposit and 3 loans, the banks received 13,550 in new deposits and lent 12,195. The most interesting point made in the publication is the admission that banks, credit unions, and savings and loans create a lot of new money when they grant loans. Read it carefully and you will see that the bank first received 12,195 in new deposits and then made 12,195 in loans. You will find the new deposits of 12,195 were created by depositing promissory notes or exchanging promissory notes for credit in the borrower's accounts. Federal Reserve Bank of New York publication, The Story of Checks and Electronic Payments, claims that you deposit cash and checks. Cash and checks have actual cash value. The FDIC call reports, that is, bank balance sheets, prove that all checking accounts balances are matched by an offsetting bank asset which can be converted into cash to pay the checking account balance liability. This proves one cannot create a new deposit balance liability without depositing something of value that can be exchanged for cash. The Federal Reserve Bank admits that if you deposited funds at the bank, you loaned the bank the funds. Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City publication Banking Regulations claims that a deposit becomes a liability of the bank, placing the bank and the depositor in a debtor-creditor relationship. The bank is the debtor and the depositor is the creditor or lender to the bank. The alleged borrower is first the creditor, depositor, and lender to the bank, proven by the bank recording the promissory note as a bank asset matched by an offsetting new bank liability called a deposit. The increase in assets and liabilities is the proof. The loan back to the same person is the check transferring the bank liability. The checking account balance to another account. Two loans were exchanged and only one borrower repaid the loan. The bank never repaid the promissory note loan to the bank from the borrower. Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago publications ABCs of figuring interest prove that the borrower is the lender to the bank. It explains how the new deposit is a loan to the bank when one opens or deposits money into a savings account. An individual makes a loan to the bank. The bank receives a new asset, promissory note, having actual cash value from the alleged borrower. This asset is used to create a new deposit, a bank liability called a checking account balance, also known as a transaction account. This is the loan to the bank. The check transfers the money to another account, which is the loan to the alleged borrower. I bet you thought states checkbook money is created by currency deposits. People deposit cash and checks. If checkbook money is created by currency deposits and new deposits are created when banks grant loans, then checkbook money is created by depositing promissory notes. Modern money mechanics explains the details of exchanging the promissory note for credits in the borrower's transaction account. Please note the phrase, quote, borrower's transaction account is possessive. When did the borrower give the bank written permission and authorization to open up a checking account, transaction account, deposit the promissory note, today's value of future payroll checks to repay the alleged loan, and withdraw a check from the deposit without the signature of the alleged borrower on a signature card or on the check? Your money states the loan, in fact, becomes new deposit money. Everyone knows you cannot have a new deposit without depositing money or something having actual cash value. A deposit is defined as entrusting money, asset, cash, in the custody of a bank to be withdrawn upon the depositor's request. There must be an asset, cash, check, promissory note deposited to create a new bank liability. Deposit, checking account balance, checkbook money. The asset deposited was the promissory note, or they sold it and deposited their proceeds. They cannot deposit it nor sell it until they legally own it. To legally own it, they must first loan consideration, money or actual cash value in accordance with the agreement. They cannot take an asset from us, deposit it, and claim it is their property without authorization, permission, and knowledge of both parties of the agreement. A bank must act as a fiduciary, trusted position of the depositor. The conversion unauthorized transfer of the promissory note from borrower to bank took place at the time of the deposit. The deposit transferred ownership of the promissory note from the individual to the bank without any loan taking place. The deposit means the bank obtained the promissory note for free and the bank used it to create an equal amount of new checkbook money, liability, checking account balance. Clearly, the bank violated contract law and acted in an unauthorized manner, transferring your wealth to the bank for free and returning it back as a loan. Loaning other depositors money ends both theft and new money creation. Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago publication, Public Debt Private Assets, states that the bank then uses our money to make loans. No one can logically argue that the bank owes depositors money that is in their accounts. Even this publication agrees with that statement. The publication is correct. The bank did use our money to loan. The problem is we did not know we loaned ourselves our own money. The bank forced us to loan ourselves our own money and to repay the money to the bank as if they loaned us other depositors' money. If we loaned ourselves our own money, we should repay ourselves our own money. Who do you know that is stupid enough to loan himself his own money and repay a third party the principal and interest when the third party refused to loan their money? If anyone is this insane, send them to me. I would love to receive their money for free. Here's the banker's secret. The trick is, the bank deposits the promissory note and then uses our money to make loans back to us. Once the banker admits that he deposited the promissory note, then we can repay the loan in its equivalent in kind, i.e. a second promissory note with no interest or lien. If we have equal protection under the law, money, credit, and agreement, and if the alleged borrower created the money for the first alleged loan, why not create some more and repay the loan? The bank refuses the second note, demanding tokens or cash, thus proving the banker is merely a money changer and not a lender. The second note has value because the banker can use it like money to buy your house if and when you ever sell it. If the banker demands you repay the second note, have him endorse the back and keep the note and then give him a new note. The bank publication admits it is money and they deposited it before. They don't want your second note because they don't want you to do to them what they did to you in the first place. The banker must deny you equal protection to keep his banking system. If both parties repay their loans, the loans would cancel. But the bank refuses to repay your unauthorized loan to them while they demand that you repay their loan. Again, equal protection is denied if the bank is to keep their European feudal banking system, thereby owning the nation's assets for free and forcing us serfs to pay the nobles their rent interest. The bank owes us for the deposit in the transaction account because they altered the agreement and made the borrower the creditor, lender, and depositor. The bank should return this money to us as a return to all loan or deposit to the bank. They received it for free and should return it. They advertised that they would loan us money. That implies they loaned us their money. They gave us one check for the earlier deposit. That was a return of our original capital. They called this a loan, but we never received a loan of actual cash value from the bank in order for the bank to obtain the promissory note. If they want us to pay them back, I believe they should either loan us the money to fund the bank loan check or return the loan from us to the bank. In either case, the bank loan is cancelled. No rights can be acquired by fraud. The promissory note acts just like a check. Both say pay to the order of. Both have value and can be exchanged for cash. A promissory note has equal value to cash or a check and is in fact a check made payable to the bank. The bank deposits it to create new tokens. By depositing the promissory note, the bankers can manipulate the money supply and in a second transaction take additional wealth, equity in your home or farm from you and transfer it to the bank. The new money creation creates inflation, forcing house prices to increase and increases the equity in homes. The bankers want your equity for free, just like they want your promissory note for free. By decreasing the money, promissory notes deposited to create new money, the banks can cause a bank-induced recession as outlined in the Federal Reserve Bank publications. By the banks creating 100 at 10% interest, you must repay 110 in 1 year, but there exists only 100 to repay 110. If the bank does not create an additional 10 by depositing a new 10 promissory note, there is not enough money to pay the bank loan, forcing a contraction in the money supply and thereby creating a recession. People are put out of work so they cannot service the debt, forcing foreclosure. The banks can scientifically predetermine what percentage of the people they can put out of work, forcing foreclosures to gain the equity in your home for free. The foreclosures employ attorneys, sheriffs, auctioneers, and judges, all financed by the one being foreclosed on. It is more profitable for a bank to foreclose on a 200,000 home with a 70,000 mortgage than for the borrower to repay the alleged loan. The bank is repaid the 70,000 and receives 130,000 bonus by forcing you or your family members out of work or to be underemployed so you cannot make the payments. Volume 2 of this book and Mr. Shroff's seminar have more details on this subject. Mr. Shroff has found a way for you to help others going through foreclosure. Using a high moral standard, Mr. Shroff keeps the 130,000 from being transferred to the banker, keeping it in your hands. Someone must receive the money. I believe it should not be the banks, but the citizens. By depositing the promissory note, the banks can receive it and the equity in your home for free, leaving the victim homeless. The deposit gives the bank an incentive to debauch the currency, causing inflation and creating a recession for their profit. The bankers' 70,000 was returned into, the bankers' 70,000 was turned into a 130,000 gain. The banker tripled his money by forcing you out on the street. With this knowledge and marketing tool, you can turn the tables and make the deposit work to your advantage. Mr. Shaw's plan uses current law and business savvy in a network of people, allowing individuals to use this concept like the bankers, but in an effort to save families, not destroy them. Mr. Shaw is hoping to teach leaders his theory, learn how to earn 5,000 part-time, showing others the concept. Mathematics shows that if one doubles 5,000 every 6 months in 5 years, it nets over 5 million. You must decide if the potential 5 million will go into your pocket, a friend's pocket, or the banker's. When you learn what the bankers know, you will understand why you will never get rich earning five per hour. You get very rich if you earn 5,000 part-time and double your money every 6 to 8 months. People who understand how profitable the banking system is do not want it changed. Money is power. If you want it changed, it will take money and power to do it. If you are broke and bankrupt, you are not a threat to anyone. Just decide if you should have the potential 5 million or if the banker should have it. Will you help people or allow them to be victims? If you wish to learn this concept and how to market this idea to others, write to Mr. Shaw. When you learn to stop fighting the banks and courts and outwit them in making money, you will simply transfer money to the bank. Transfer money the bank would have received for free back into your pocket. Stop getting mad, just get even. Learn the secret to making lots of money and then apply it to your advantage. You decide if you will be a slave or a king. The secret is in making the deposit work to your advantage. A true friend will share this secret to the very wealthy with other friends and profit from the knowledge. We hope you wish to quit your 5-an-hour job. We hope you utilize our marketing concept to your advantage. How many of your friends want to end their 10-an-hour job and obtain millions of dollars, leaving the slavery of freedom for freedom? Start by sharing this book with others. Complete the training and make money by helping others. For the record, I am not recommending buying foreclosed properties. Stop profiting from the misery of others. Help the victims. As the judge and jury, you must decide if the written agreement ever agreed that the alleged borrower be the lender, creditor, depositor, or the one giving the bank the money to fund the check, and never have the capital returned unless the bank returned it as a loan from the bank to you. As judge and jury, you must decide if there was written permission or authorization for the bank to take actual cash value from you and deposit it, and for the bank to receive it for free. Was this a theft, larceny, or conversion and fraudulent concealment? You must examine the bank policy to prove the banker's intent. Intent is needed to prove criminal activity. Remember, the bank advertised a loan. The written agreement the bank wrote said interest, which is defined for the use of borrowed money. It did not say exchange and charge as if there was a loan. It did not say you were the lender, depositor, or exchanger. The bank advertised, wrote the agreement, and wrote the bookkeeping entries proving their intent. Can the bank prove I'm wrong? To prove I am wrong, they must prove the Federal Reserve Bank publications are wrong. If the bank claims they loaned other depositors money, they must prove they violated the Federal Reserve Bank policies and procedures which could land them in jail. As I see it, if the bank claims that the promissory note was not loaned to the bank or deposited, they must prove that the promissory note was given to them for free, stolen, converted, or that they violated the Federal Reserve Bank procedures. No borrower I talked to knew that they gave the bank actual cash value in the amount of the loan for free and that the bank returned it back as a loan. The Constitution gave us the right to contract, making the written agreement the highest law. Congress cannot change the agreement without violating the Constitution. As judge and jury, please look up the following definitions in the law dictionary and ask yourself if the bank committed the following crimes: mail fraud, wire fraud, calling you to pay, fraudulent conversion, fraudulent concealment, fraudulent misrepresentation, false statements, embezzlement, promissory fraud, fraud in the inducement, fraud, forgery of the promissory note, forgery of the check, withdrawing the funds from the borrower's transaction account, extortion, white-collar crime, deliberate deception, trick, breach of contract or agreement, de facto contract, insurance fraud to FDIC, deceptive advertising, deceit, theft, larceny, slavery, attempt to suspend the Constitution through national bankruptcy, illegal lien, threat to bring fraud on the court to collect money, bad faith, filing forged documents at the county level, or any number of other crimes. The title insurance companies must have known exactly what was happening. They participated in it and filed the records at the county level. They insured it, so it makes me wonder if you can collect the insured value because of their involvement. This is an interesting legal question. All right, guys, so we're going to stop there for today. Remember, strengthen body, powers, and mind. Thank you for your time and patience. Stay up.